No more, my Lord. No. Okay, so now we're starting our unit on slavery, and in this particular segment of the notes, we're going to concentrate on slavery and the law. We're going to look at some of the compromises and congressional acts that were passed or proposed leading up to the Civil War. Okay, the specific things we're going to look at in this presentation is the Missouri Compromise, the Western expansion of the Mexican-American War. We're also going to look at the Wilmot Proviso, the Compromise of 1850, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and how that brings about this concept we know as popular sovereignty. And then last, but certainly not least, the Dred Scott case. And like I told you last time, in this we're going to look at some broad concepts, and then we'll come back in class and fill in those specific details that go along with these. Now, the Missouri Compromise, we've touched on it before, so some memory recall, and think about it think about it by yourself and try to answer these two questions. What two states did it involve? Obviously, one of them's a gimme. And what was the issue with Missouri coming in as a new state? So you really got to think of that one other state that comes in and what the specific issue is. Alright, so Missouri enters as a slave state, and if you didn't guess it already, Maine comes in as the other state. Maine is the other state that's involved. It comes in as a free state, and this maintains that balance of power that we talked about in class. Along with the Missouri Compromise is the 3630 line, which is really important because it's going to pop up again and again. The 3630 line was established as a boundary line, so to speak. Slavery cannot exist above this line. And keep in mind, at this time, the United States only extended to the Louisiana Purchase, so this line did not go all the way to California. As the map indicates, it's a great visual representation. You have Missouri up here in the north being admitted in 1821. Maine comes in at about the same time. It's admitted as a free state. Here's that 3630 line. It's highlighted in black on here, and I'm going to kind of encircle it. Now keep in mind, this is U.S. territory over here. Over here is Spain, and it remains Spain's until 1821 when the Mexicans declare their independence from Spain and take the land back. And then, of course, in 1848, the United States takes over pretty much everything on this side, and it becomes ours. And then you have your issue with your 3630 line extending outward. But as of right now, the 3630 line only exists right here. Another one of the laws that come into place, or potential laws that come into place, is the Wilmot Proviso. Before the Wilmot Proviso is introduced, the United States annexed what we now know as Texas, and we had also fought the Mexican-American War and took all the lands in between New Mexico and California. So you have all of this territory being added to the United States, and you have a big question: is it going to be free? Is it going to be slave? Now, the Wilmot Proviso is going to come in and try to establish some rules here. Before it's established, some people actually consider extending the Missouri Compromise, because keep in mind, it only extended in what was formerly the Louisiana Purchase. The Wilmot Proviso promoted this concept of banning slavery in all the territories ceded from Mexico, and it also said that this included the lands that were gained in between the Nueces and the Rio Grande. Keep in mind, these are the two rivers of dispute over the Mexican-American War. And it kind of finalized where that southern border of Texas is going to be at the Rio Grande as opposed to the Nueces. So the land in between the Nueces and the Rio Grande now belongs to the United States, and some proponents say that the Wilmot Proviso applies to that land as well. So the Wilmot Proviso, short and sweet, bans slavery in the new lands gained. And here you have kind of another map, simulation of the United States. Here's that old Missouri Compromise line. Here's the Wilmot Proviso. 1846. All this land over here that had been gained from the Mexican-American War, the proponents are saying that this is off limits to slavery. And then keep in mind, some other proponents say that this also includes this land down here at the Rio Grande. The Compromise of 1850 is another one of the important acts or progressions that the United States makes as far as dealing with the issue of slavery. Now, there have been some issues as far as California entering the state as a union and coming in as a free state. Southerners said this is an attack on the way of life and it's going to hurt the balance of power in Congress. Well, Henry Clay steps in. He's known as the Great Compromiser, and he proposes this compromise of how to allow California but also appease the South within the issue of slavery. California enters the Union as a free state in 1850. At this time also, Utah and New Mexico become territories. And there's no determination of free or slave going on here. The reason that's important is because Texas claimed parts of Utah and New Mexico as a part of their original boundary, and that's kind of an issue of tension as far as free or slave. But at this time, Utah and New Mexico are incorporated as territories, and there's no determination on their fate as free as slave as of yet. The slave trade, as a part of the compromise, is going to be banned in Washington, D.C., and we'll talk a little bit more about that in class. And then, of course, the fugitive slave law is going to be tightened, and this is a great way to appease Southerners. A lot of Southerners thought that the old fugitive slave laws were not being enforced, and they wanted a harsher law and harsher penalties. So this compromise kind of complies with that. Southerners are now more satisfied with the fact that runaway slaves will be captured and brought back to the South, and anybody that's holding slaves up north trying to hide them will be persecuted for their actions. And here's the United States as it would sit after the Compromise of 1850. The Missouri line is still in place. Indian territories in Oklahoma. Texas is now a slave state. Here are those areas ceded by Texas. Texas basically gave up their rights or claimed that this is a territory in what would be, Arizona and the New Mexico territories. Utah is also unknown as well. California enters as a free state, and of course, lands above these lines are also free. All right, two more laws or two more aspects to go. One's going to be the Kansas-Nebraska Act, 1854. It's proposed by Stephen Douglas, opens up the territories of Kansas and Nebraska for settlement. This is west of Iowa and Missouri. This act would repeal the Missouri Compromise, and when it's passed, it does repeal that old Missouri Compromise as far as no slaves north of that line. And it's going to establish this concept of popular sovereignty. Real easy to remember what popular sovereignty is before we go more in depth in our class is just to say that popular sovereignty is majority wins. So the people in that territory would vote, and those people will decide whether or not they have slavery or they don't. And then in 1856, the Dred Scott case is going to come about. This is an 1856 legal decision, and it involved Dred Scott, who was a slave from Missouri. This is him pictured at the right. Now, Scott's owner at one point took him past that 3630 line. That owner eventually is going to die, and because of this, Scott is going to begin the process of a lawsuit that sues for his freedom. His argument is going to be that he was taken north of that 3630 line into free territory and was therefore free. We have a typo down here. Cross that out and make sure that you recognize it is free. Now, the decision that comes back, Robert B. Taney, Chief Justice, ruled that slaves did not have the rights of citizens because slaves were, in fact, property. And because of this, Dred Scott could not sue. It was, in fact, illegal for him to sue. The court also stated that the Missouri Compromise is unconstitutional, so they even went a bit further than just looking at Dred Scott's case. They went back and looked at old congressional acts such as the Missouri Compromise and declared it unconstitutional. The reason they said this is because slaves are property. And because they are property, blocking slavery extension would block property rights, which is guaranteed by the Constitution. Okay, and this is the end of our notes on slaves and the law. Keep in mind these are broad concepts. We're going to fill in the details in class. Make sure you go back and look over these, look over your notes, and make sure you pull those notes off the class materials page as well.
My Lord, Lord, I'll never turn back. No.